a really successful writer in the US said this to me when I was first thinking, oh, secretly, I would quite like to write. Robin Schiff, who wrote Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. She now writes me in Paris. She said to me, just set a timer, sit down, write for half an hour every morning, even if you're just literally typing, I hate writing.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Conversation with Nadine Matheson. As always, I hope that you're well and I hope that you've had a good week. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't sure if you were going to get an episode this week. The reason why, last week I was at that last stage of completing my edits for book 4. And last Tuesday, so this time last week, I was looking at my manuscript and it's a physical printout of the manuscript that I do the initial set of editing notes on. And I'm looking at this stack of papers, highlighted, purple notes, red notes, blue notes, post-it notes, everything on this manuscript. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, there is no way I'm going to finish this before my deadline or by my deadline. I just thought there's no way. And the thing is, I've done most of the work. It's just transferring it onto the screen. And I just thought, I'm not going to get it done. And if I don't get it done, I'm not going to have time to do my podcast, which was just edit this episode and do the intros and pull it out, because I do it all myself. I just thought it's not going to happen. But by miracle, which is why I'm very happy. I'm extremely happy. There's been a lot of dancing involved because I completed my edits at, I think it was 5:35 on Friday evening. I completed my edits. So I've been ecstatic. I've been overjoyed. And it meant that I was able to complete this podcast. So I'm pleased. I'm pleased to be joining you today. I'm pleased that you get to hear from my amazing guest, who is the author, Kate Ruby. And she's also a TV producer. And in our episode, we were talking about a number of things, but including how to stay on top of projects. Because as a TV producer, I'm sure she says that at some point she's got 7 projects on the go, which is crazy. Because could you imagine having 7 writing projects on the go? In theory, I had the edits to do on this manuscript. I was also completing a short story. So that was 2 projects. I also was kind of planning out books 5 and 6 for Henley. So I suppose I was kind of working on 4 things, which is a lot. It really is a lot. And I'd made a concerted effort in 2024 to be really organised. And I think I succeeded in that. But in 2025, I want to do even better. As in, I want to have a clear idea of what I'm going to be focusing on and what I'm going to be working on. And not have this crazy scattergun approach. Anyway, enough about me. Let's get on with my show. This week, I'm in conversation with author Kate Ruby, and in our conversation, we talk about moving from rom-coms to domestic thrillers, the transition from TV producer to novel writer, and adapting a book for the screen. Now, as always, sit back, we'll go for a walk and enjoy the conversation. Kate Ruby, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you, Nadine.
Right, my first question for you is, how would you describe your publishing journey?
That's an interesting one. So I first published in 2009 under a different name. Under my Kate Ruby is actually a pseudonym, but under my real name. And it was a rom-com, and I was in a dilemma. I was in that moment in a relationship where you either have to get married or accept that it's not going to work out. And I started to novelize the dilemma. It wasn't my story exactly, but I started thinking that it was actually quite a fun premise for a rom-com. I went away and did an Arvon course, which was residential for a few days, and just sort of got the words down, not expecting that it would flow. And it did. And someone there told an agent at Curtis Brown about it. I was incredibly lucky, honestly. And then they contacted me and asked to read it, and then they took me on as a client, and then I finished it, and then there was a tiny little bidding war for it, and Penguin bought it, and then I published 4 rom-coms, and then moved more into the kind of domestic thriller space.
My research has been so rubbish. I normally pride myself on doing my research, and I had no idea about the rom-coms and that you'd written 4 of them.
Yeah. Well, I do kind of, now I go as Kate Ruby. I've got a kind of I'm a bit of a spy. I've got 2 identities.
Do you feel like, because I've asked this with other people who use pseudonyms for their books, or have written, so they've written in different genres and under different names. Do you feel as though you become a different person if you're writing, well, when you were writing rom-coms in comparison to writing domestic thrillers?
It feels like a long time ago now. It feels like kind of different, I was in my early 30s. It was kind of a different point in my life. So these feel much more psychologically interesting to me at this point in my 40s.
And who are you before you became the published author? Because I'm always interested in people who they were before they started on this journey.
Well, I've had a long career in television drama, which I feel very grateful for. So I guess I've been working with story my whole career since I was in my early 20s. At the very start of my career, I was a television publicist, but then I wanted to kind of get my hands more dirty. So I've kind of built a career out of narrative and story, and hoping to reach a wide audience with those stories.
Did you always know that you was a creative person, like back as a child?
I mean, I loved stories, and I had quite an unusual childhood, and we didn't have a TV, and I was an only child with quite eccentric parents. So books were a real comfort for me, and stories, and a real escape. So it's always been kind of part of my life journey.
I'm sitting there trying to think if I've spoken to anyone on this podcast who grew up without a TV. I've always spoken, everyone's always spoken about being surrounded either books at home, or they went libraries, that sort of story regarding books. But I don't think I've spoken to anyone who didn't grow up with a TV, which is the opposite for me, because my dad is an electronic engineer. So we were surrounded by TVs because he was fixing TVs, and so we always had TVs. So it's such a part, like a strong part of my life.
I know. Well, it's pretty stupid to be a television executive who grew up without television, but there we are.
Do you think that's what drew you to it, to TV?
Well, it certainly used to be like when I got to go around to a friend's house and they had a TV, it was pretty exciting to be able to go and watch Grange Hill. So who can say?
And what was it like when you got home? So, you've been at your friend's house watching Grange Hill. I loved Grange Hill. Watching Grange Hill. And then you return home. What was that moment like for you?
I mean, I really wanted a TV, Nadine. I'm not going to lie.
I didn't think this is how this podcast recording was going to start off, with just talking to someone who works in TV, but the fact that they grew up without, because you just can't imagine it now, because you can sit at a bus stop looking at your phone, catching up on TV. You don't need to have a physical set in your house. But I think that just nothing. I say nothing when you had books, but
I had a lot of books. I read A Little House on the Prairie a lot of times.
But you wouldn't have seen Little House on the Prairie, which was so good.
No need to rub it in.
I'm sorry. Let me get a hold of myself. I'm sorry. So when you went into TV, you said you started out as a publicist.
Yes.
Did you know what you meant by trying to get that you wanted to get your hands dirty?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun job to do straight out of college. I was really lucky to get it. But I just, I really wanted to, rather than kind of working on other people's creative endeavours, although it was fun to write press releases and all of that kind of things, I really wanted to actually be kind of making stories. So then I moved, I started at Channel 4, and then I moved to the BBC, and then I worked on a couple of crime shows, and then in a really junior capacity, and then kind of worked my way up through various shows. I did a show called Where the Heart Is, for ITV, and then did an adaptation of Nicholas Nickleby, and then went back to the BBC and worked on all kinds of different shows over a long period. Things like Being Human and Spooks and Rome, and really fun big shows.
Wow. You say you didn't know when you was working on these shows. I'm just really interested in just like being a kid and being younger and being creative. Like, what were your outlets like in terms of exploring that creativity?
What, as a kid, do you mean?
Yeah.
Or
as a kid, yeah.
I suppose, I mean, I grew up in London, and not loads, just school really. And I suppose my parents were quite kind of bookish, so they really sort of, like gave me stories. Yeah.
And when you was in school, did you find like that was encouraged, that creative spark that you had?
Not massively, honestly. I don't know about you, but school in London in the kind of 80s and 90s wasn't like the most they weren't like sitting around nurturing your inner soul in quite the way that maybe they might be now. I don't know.
No, it's funny because when I look at my nieces and nephews and my friends' children going to school, especially going to secondary school, it feels like exploring that creative part of them. It's now become like a bigger part of the curriculum, whereas I feel you said back in the 80s and 90s, it was just, you just need to go to school, get your qualifications, and then get out and go to the next step.
No, so I feel very lucky. I've had some real opportunities, in building that TV career, but also, my journey into being published was really like relatively easy in comparison to some people. And I don't take that, lightly, because I know how hard people work to get published.
Yeah. Did you know what to expect? I know you said you did the course, but I always think there's a difference, because I did a course, but there's a difference in like you doing the course and then knowing someone tells you, you apply for agents and this is the process, what happens. But do you think you fully appreciated it or fully understood what it entailed to become an author?
Who does, And also, there was this tiny little bidding war for the first book, and then it sold about 9 copies when it came out. And then the second book actually sold really well, but the first one that everyone was so excited about just, didn't really do much at all.
What does that, I'm saying do to your psyche, but that's the only way I could think of phrasing it. But because when it's like when you're in that auction and everyone's telling you they want you, and everyone's telling you that your book's amazing and that you're going to be amazing and that you're going to fly off the shelves and this is the best thing ever. And as you said, it comes to publication, and then someone at some point tells you, you sold 9 copies. Like, what does that do to you emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, that was tough, but I think it's also made me quite sanguine now. Everything You Have, which I just published, is my 8th book. And at this point, I feel like you have to kind of, I've been very lucky to be writing under contract, but you have to write for the love of it and not be too attached to the outcome. I mean, my previous book, Tell Me Your Lies, which is about a therapist who infiltrates a family, and seems like she's at the beginning, she seems like she's the answer to their prayers, their sort of 20-something daughters going off the rails. And then gradually you realize that she's got a nefarious agenda. That book got Richard Judy, which obviously gave it a massive boost. And then there was a kind of quite a big kerfuffle for the TV rights as well. So that was really exciting. I was really grateful. And then again, with Everything You Have, it's been optioned for TV as well. So, it swings and roundabouts in this business.
Yeah, it is. Do you think, working in TV and having that TV background, because I think all writers will say there's at some point you'll face rejection. And it could be in terms of book sales, it could be your editor saying, I don't like this idea. Let's look at a different idea. But do you think that, working in TV production, that's prepared you for dealing with rejection as an author?
Yes, I suppose so, because at the same time, I'm developing various TV projects with different writers, and often you think, oh my God, this is about to get greenlit, it's going to be massive. And then that doesn't necessarily happen, and it's gutting. So, and then something else might suddenly develop momentum and be, like a really big show. Like there's a thriller I did a few years ago called The Girl Before that, we went through a whole complicated development process, and it was during COVID, and you think this is never going to happen, and then suddenly we had like really big cast like Gugu Mbatha-Raw and David Oyelowo, and it was like a really big deal, and it was on HBO in the US. So, you know, you have to roll with the punches, I guess.
Do you think there's things in your, you know, growing up that prepared you for that, like that roller coaster of being in TV production?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, yeah, I had quite a complicated time, so I think that I try not to take things too personally, or, you know, I'm quite good at, you know, dealing with stressful situations, and certainly TV production can be very stressful.
What's the most stressful, if you had to say, if you had to pick one component of it, what's the most stressful part of it?
I think what quite often happens is you have one script that you work on and you work on and you work on with the writer and the broadcaster for maybe 2 years. And then suddenly you get a green light, which is brilliant. But then they're like, we want it on screen in like X amount of time. And then it's a complete kickbollock scramble to get everything else done to the standard you get it done in order to have it, you know, on screen. And then, you know, casting can be traumatic as well, because you obviously, particularly now we have a very crowded market, you want, you know, you need to find a profile in your cast to cut through in a really overcrowded space. So that can be really stressful. Sometimes when you lose the person that you were desperate to do it, it can just be just be a little bit devastating.
Yeah. Did you find it a challenge, or was it easy, you know, transitioning from, you know, working in production where you're working with a massive team, and you said it could be something, you know, from optioning a piece of work and then going through to production and post-production. Is it a challenge then being on your own as a writer?
Right. Well, I do a full-time job, so I only spend, you know, most of the time when I'm writing, it's like first thing in the morning. And I'm doing like a couple of hours and then going to work. So I don't spend that much time on my own doing it. I don't have the luxury. I would find it, but to that point, I think I would find it really challenging to be a full-time writer, because it does demand it. You know, it is an awful lot of, you know, isolation. I get quite a lot out of having the two careers, even though it can be a real juggle.
Were you surprised, like, that's how your life has turned out, having these two careers with the TV production and the writing?
It's ridiculous. It's not really sustainable, but I really enjoy them both. So yeah, I'm also having fun because the new book as well, Everything You Have, is being developed for TV, and I'm an executive producer on it. The premise for that one is that it is a boss who hires this kind of whip smart assistant who she thinks is going to be the absolute answer to her prayers. She works in this in a branding agency, so kind of devising campaigns for big brands, and, you know, kind of sort of glamorous on the outside, but actually really tough and demanding. And she also has quite a complicated domestic situation where she's desperate for a baby, but she only has stepchildren. Anyway, Jenna enters her life and seems to just kind of bring everything into focus and make everything easier. And then you realise that actually Jenna's subtly undermining her at work, and it kind of reaches a crescendo, and you're asking yourself, what is her motivation here? And that hopefully is a big twist at the end.
Yeah. Well, when you was writing that book, I know with the Richard and Judy pick, with Tell Me Your Lies, and I read that it was loosely inspired on a real life scenario. And I was asked this question at a panel, I think was it back in the summer? It could have been last year, about using real life events, or, you know, real life people's stories in your own books. Do you ever think about that? Because my answer was, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it.
Yeah, that was very, very loosely inspired by a therapist who's been pursued by a lot of kind of highfalutin families in London, who felt that she exerted undue influence on their daughters. I moved it away from that story quite a lot as well, because I was more interested in creating. I love shows like Succession. I love writing about big, complicated families. And I really wanted to give the family in that story lots of secrets, lots of their own kind of nefarious agendas that are going on. So you're kind of constantly pulled back and forth as to who you can trust. So it wasn't like I was sort of trying to replicate that story per se, but I did find that idea of the kind of access and control you might have as a therapist and how that kind of filters out into a family really fascinating.
It's amazing, good like talking about your new book as well, everything you have. It's when you look at how much people can influence their surroundings and the people around it, and then sometimes those people, they have no idea that it's happening because it's so subtle.
It's
and
insidious.
Then there comes a point.
Yeah. And I really wanted to write about the workplace, actually, and the dynamics within a workplace, because, psychologically, I think the workplace is a really interesting arena. We potentially spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our own families. And if there is, if there are difficult personal, professional dynamics at work, they can really affect the whole of your life. And equally, if you make a close friend at work and then it goes wrong, well, you can't divorce them. You can't stop returning their calls. You've still got to be in like a team meeting with them every Monday. So how does that, what kind of pressure cooker environment does that create? And then if you give it a thriller context, you're hopefully, you're off to the races.
Yeah, I remember when I was, I graduated from uni, so I was 21. And my uncle took me to lunch. That was like, you graduated, I'm taking you out for lunch. I'm like, okay, he's taking me out to lunch. But part of it was, congratulations, finishing uni. But the other half was, right, I'm now going to tell you about the real world. And one of the things that I'll never forget he said to me was that you will never know what it's like to, what people are like until you work with them, because until you work in that office environment, you won't truly understand people. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about, Uncle Michael. Like, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
And the minute I went to work, and I think it's because I used to work at the BBC in Talents Rights, and it was a massive office, open planned office, so many different personalities, and you're dealing with so you're dealing with management and everybody. And I thought, oh, now I understand what it means working with people and understanding people.
It's really complex. And the other aspect of everything you have is that it's very much about the generational divides as well, between kind of the perhaps entitlement of Gen X in some ways and the kind of shifting attitudes of Gen Z. And I really wanted to create a story again with alternate viewpoints on events where you kind of have sympathy and frustration with both sides, that there aren't easy heroes and villains.
As a writer, because I'm always interested to know, when did you always feel comfortable from the beginning calling yourself a writer, or was it something that you had to lean into?
I suppose I had a slightly strange path, because I wasn't like trying to write for ages, and then so I did that Arvon course. And then I got an agent, sort of off the back of it. So in a sense, then I did, I kind of was a writer in that I had professional representation. But I think it is complicated for people when they're kind of trying to do it as a side hustle, and how much ownership you take of that before something's happened. But I think it's a real kind of way that I've taught writing a little bit as well. And I think it's a real kind of, it can be quite therapeutic, full stop, whether or not you get published. Just it's a kind of method of self-expression that can be incredibly cathartic.
And when you're teaching writing, and I've asked this of other writers who teach and mentor, what do you think is like the main like misconception that you have to address when you're working with new writers?
I think some of it's about discipline, actually. I think it's about like not having like 7 works in progress. It's also about creating a bit of order in terms of just actually, like, a really successful writer in the US said this to me when I was first thinking, oh, secretly, I would quite like to write. Robin Schiff, who wrote Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. She now writes in Paris. She said to me, just set a timer, sit down, write for half an hour every morning, even if you're just literally typing, I hate writing. And actually, it's incredibly good advice, because like a book is so long and it's a journey of 1,000 steps. So just keep taking the next step.
Is that what you tell yourself? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm on chapter 1, why am I doing this? But I would also say that I do think courses, or maybe hiring someone to teach you, can be incredibly helpful. I do think it's quite hard to just start writing in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And to have some kind of support or group as well can just be really, really helpful.
Was there anything that, once you're in the publishing industry, dealing with your rom-coms first, and your first books are going out, was there anything that surprised you that you thought you would have been like prepared for? Because you're working in this other industry for so long, you probably think, I can deal with anything. Like I always think, as being a lawyer, you're like, there's nothing that could shake me, I can deal with anything. And you get in publishing, you're like, oh no.
Yeah, I guess there's things like, say the publisher this hasn't happened to me for many years, but a cover where you're just like, I really don't think that represents the book, or I really don't think that's going to kind of grab a casual buyer in WH Smith or whatever. That's quite hard, that you don't have much control over that. Similarly, sometimes I wanted to change the title and it hasn't necessarily felt 100% right, and then you're kind of grappling to find the right title. And I think it's both wanting to respect people's expertise, but also just keep a bit of a clear focus on what your mission for that book is.
Yeah. Do you think being in TV like helped you deal with, especially that editing process and working with the editors and having, maybe 101 comments about what you should be doing with your characters and your plot? Do you feel because you're so, you always work with this community of people when you're producing a show. Did it help you with that part of the writing process?
Yeah, I suppose because I give notes quite a lot of the time in my TV job, writers writing on scripts. I've been very lucky with my editors. I've really kind of respected the feedback I've been given. Where I'd say that the TV probably helps me as well in kind of just conceptualizing novels is just knowing that you need a really kind of clear, grabbable concept up top. And then you need a real specificity in the story so it doesn't feel generic. But that kind of very kind of graspable proposition for the reader or for the publisher who's buying the book is so important.
Yeah.
And it's
when you're writing
those, it's the same when I'm pitching those to broadcasters. If you can't like really nail what the concept is quickly to the BBC or Sky, they're just going to glaze over.
That's always so hard though, because even like myself, I was talking to my agent and we're talking about writing standalones. I'm like, I've got some ideas. But I was saying to a friend last week, me having the idea is one thing. Me trying to now condense that idea into a pitch that I can just throw to my agent and say, so he can make a quick decision on it. That is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It is difficult, but it's worth doing. It's worth really just kind of going back to it. It's funny because sometimes with a TV idea, we might be, say, pitching it in a more US style to like a few different broadcasters. And each pitch you do, you kind of learn what hasn't necessarily connected on other pitches, and then you refine it the next time you deliver it. And I think it's just that constant boiling down.
Yeah. Is there a big difference then between pitching to the US and in comparison to a UK production company?
There can be. There can be, because it's sometimes you don't sort of necessarily do like a formalized pitch in the UK. It tends to be a more informal conversation, or increasingly you're working off, you commission a script and then you're going out with a script, so the concept is laid out. Whereas in the US, it's more common that you do like a 20 to 25 minute presentation on the whole series, and then they decide whether they're going to commission a script off the back of that.
What was that like for you the very first time you found yourself, pitching to a US production company? When, especially when you've been doing it a certain way with the UK, they're so informally, and then you have to deliver.
Well, it's normally me coaching a screenwriter to do that, and then making sure I set them up properly at the beginning and all of that kind of thing. But it definitely takes a different kind of, it requires showmanship.
Did you really? Is that a surprise for the writers? Because it's like being a writer, it's just you. Unless you're in a writer's room, but most of the time it's just you. And you don't have to be a showman, because half the time you're sitting there in your leggings and your hoodie, trying to get something done. And now you're saying to the writer, you need to put on the show.
Yeah, I think it can be a bit of a shock, and you have to kind of give people the right support to do that and really work on that pitch together.
Do you think that's a difference with writing, I say publishing, in comparison to TV, having that level of support and preparing you for the next step? Do you think that travels through in both industries, or?
I think novel writing is a lot more solitary, isn't it? You're spending a lot of time just, as you say, stuck in your bedroom in your leggings with a tea bag, trying to churn out the words. That is why I couldn't do it full time, and I have massive respect for people like you who do.
Oh, God.
But TV is certainly more collaborative, and then obviously when you go into production, you're suddenly adding like 100 people to the mix.
Yeah. When you're writing everything you have, what were like the main challenges for you writing that book? Especially because it doesn't matter. Like I said, it's book number 8 is everything you have. Yeah. And I mean, I've written 5 books I've written.
Keep going.
I find it, thank you. But it doesn't get easier with the next book. And you think it should do. You think it would be, I've done this 3, 4, 5, 6 times before.
Yeah.
Book 7 or 8, I've got it down.
Yeah. I think for me, in some ways, it gets harder because I'm pushing myself more and more and trying to get the prose more and more polished and trying to make sure that the concept is as robust as it can possibly be and that the twists fall in the right place, but they feel properly emotionally motivated. That's really important to me. I hate those books where you're just suddenly like, but that character the character you painted in chapter 2 would never have done that in chapter 12. So it's a lot of refinement.
You find it a challenge switching your brain around? Because I did a screenwriting course, and I've got a screenplay that's been sitting on my computer for far too long, and I just find it switching my head from novel writing to screenwriting it takes a lot of mental work to do that. Did you find that a challenge initially?
Yeah, I think they are slightly different. I mean, I have done some screenwriting, and I had a project at Sky that didn't happen in the end, but I largely on the screenwriting side, I'm supporting writers rather than doing it myself. But yeah, sometimes just sort of, starting the day super early, trying to get those words down, and then trying to kind of have the creative focus to do everything that I need to do in the day. It can be quite an exhausting process.
What do screenwriters come to you with their concerns? Like, what are the most common?
I think it's often just about how you're best structuring a story to kind of get that concept across, but give it enough kind of surprise over the pilot episode and make it stand out in the market so it actually gets all the way to green light. I've just done a couple of rom-coms actually, so it's kind of nice to go back into that rom-com world. So, we did a show called The Flat Share for Paramount Plus that did really well for them. And we've got another. It's an adaptation of a best-selling Beth O'Leary book, and we've done a second Beth O'Leary book, The Road Trip, that's coming out this Christmas. And the kind of genre conventions in rom-com are obviously quite different from the genre conventions in a thriller. So you're kind of trying to create your kind of jeopardy and momentum in slightly different ways. But it's all fundamentally about character and structure.
Listeners, it's time for a very short break. If you're enjoying this conversation with Nadine Matheson and want to help keep the podcast going, why not buy me a cup of coffee? Your support goes such a long way in keeping these conversations flowing. Just check out the link in the show notes. I was going to ask you about adapting books adapting from the page to the screen.
Yeah.
I don't know if easy is the right. How hard is it? Like, what are the main challenges of doing that? Because obviously you can't put everything in the book on the screen.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting question, Nadine, because I've now done it with quite a lot of books that we've optioned and then brought to the screen. The Girl Before, The Flat Share, The Road Trip, Watership Down, Rabbits.
Oh my God, don't. I'm still traumatized. I'm still traumatized from the 1970s Watership Down.
Yeah. So I've done it from that side, working with other people's texts, and kind of super respectful of the books. I really like to, I love books, and I really want every author that we work with to feel really good about what we've done. But then also I've gone through the process with my own books. I've had like 4 of them optioned, and certainly with Tell Me Your Lies, it's interesting because it's being developed for a big US network at the moment. And, we've added lots of elements that aren't in the book. There's a murder now, which isn't in the book, and things like that. But actually the requirements of a TV series are so different from the requirements of a novel, particularly because often you're trying to construct a series that can be multi-season. So normally a book is kind of self-enclosed, it's a complete story, and that's what the reader wants. But when you're moving into TV, you've then you can't resolve things so much necessarily, and you've got to create kind of bigger, more explosive plot so that you can generate like 24 episodes ideally.
Is it, when you're working with writers, so they've written their novel and then they decided, or they want to be involved in the adaptation of their novel, what is the biggest challenge you find, like, for that writer? Because you have an attachment to your work. I remember when my first book was optioned, I was like, this is not my skill set, like, so I'm happy for someone else to do it. But then afterwards I was like, it's my book, like I could feel that attachment, like pulling at my heartstrings.
Yeah, completely. I think it varies project to project. I mean, we've had a brilliant relationship with all the authors that we've worked with, which I'm really glad about. But on The Girl Before, the author actually adapted it himself, and he'd written before, but he hadn't had anything greenlit. So when I went to him and said that I really wanted to option it, it's originally been optioned by Ron Howard off the manuscript, and then we're going to do it as a movie. And then it didn't work out in the development process. And obviously that was a big Hollywood auction. And then I was coming to him as a kind of British producer saying, trust me with this time round. I'm really going to try and get it all the way. And one of the things I said to him was that, I knew he wanted to adapt it, that I'd love to support him to do that. And we did get it all the way, and we got it greenlit. But then in other instances, authors can be, very kind of hands off and not have much to do with it. But yeah, I think it's working with the author in the right way so that they feel included and part of the process, and that you're respecting their work, but also making them feel okay about coming on the journey with you for all the inevitable changes that you're going to make.
Are you able to put yourself, when it's your own books, so with everything you have and Tell Me Your Lies, are you able to put yourself like in that place as the writer, and I'm handing it over to someone else? Are you able to step back and be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I am an executive producer on both of them, so I've only stepped back so far. But the screenwriter who's adapting them is absolutely fantastic, and I'm working with another exec producer from another company on them as well. So, I have to not be too precious, and I'm so grateful for all the input that they've put in, because probably to just be producing it on my own would be too hard. You wouldn't necessarily see the bigger picture always. So it's been a really positive experience.
I'm going to ask a really silly question. I always say to my students, like, there's no silly questions, but sometimes I'm like, what exactly is an executive producer?
Okay. Not a silly question at all. It's a very good question. So as an executive producer, you've got the kind of overall responsibility for the whole production. So it can mean different things, but for me, because I come from a creative development background, it tends to be that I'm there from inception to the very end. So I might say with something like The Girl Before, find a book, try and option it, which may be competitive. So then I have to try and, kind of win a pitch effectively. Then I will try and set it up with a broadcaster. So with that, having optioned it, took it to the BBC, and then they took it into development, which doesn't mean it will necessarily happen, but it means that they're kind of committing to trying to get it all the way. Then I will potentially, with that, the author was adapting it, but often I'll be then looking for somebody to adapt the novel. So say I've got 5 Bad Deeds, which is a brilliant novel by Kaz Freer under option at the moment.
Yes, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I love that book. And then we've got a big screenwriter who we brought onto it, who's now adapting it. So that's a big part of the process, is finding the right adapter. And then after that, we'll go through a number of drafts and then hopefully get it greenlit by a broadcaster. But sometimes you might need to pull other levers to get that to happen. So say with The Girl Before, we actually attached Gugu Mbatha-Raw before it was greenlit to increase its chances. And then also then the choice of director is really important. The rest of the casting, doing the rest of the scripts, which is often a kick-bollock scramble.
I love that term, a kick-bollock scramble.
Yeah. Overseeing the actual production itself. At that point, there's lots of people who are technically much better than me. Like, there'll be a producer and a whole production team doing all the various things that need to happen, like, costume and actually, like with The Girl Before, we had to build. It's all based around this kind of sinister architecturally designed house. So we built that in a studio in Bristol during lockdown. So that's a whole kind of, there's so much kind of really detailed thought that has to go into how you're now going to realize that script, because you could have a brilliant script and then you could really screw it up by, making the wrong choices in, say, casting, director, even music can really skew things. All of that. And then the editing process is really key. Things change enormously in the edit. You may find that you really kind of significantly restructure a story because when you're watching it as it was on the page doesn't feel propulsive on screen. So that whole process is really, really elaborate at the other end. You always think, you wrap a production and you think, oh, I'm going to breathe out, and then it's like, no breathing out, there's a lot more to do now. I'm
sitting there just wow, because when you compare it to writing a book, not that writing a book, it's not hard. Of course, it's hard, but your role is quite set. You write the book. You're in control. You're in control of building that world, and then you pass it on to your editor, and then you have this back and forth interactive process where you're just trying to create it into something better, and then it goes off and it's published. But the fact that you could, spend all these, I say, weeks producing the show, making the program, and then you said you sit there in an edit room and realize actually this doesn't work,
or it needs to change, or it's
it needs to change.
Are you
okay with that stage? Because I would be like, what the hell?
There's always a minute where you think, oh my god, is this going to come together right? But then you always come out the other side. I mean, on a first episode on a series, we call them cuts, so you go through a lot of different cuts of it, trying different things and bring it out, and making changes to the music and things like that, and just trying to get the pacing and the tone right so that the audience know exactly what they're buying into in the first 10 minutes in a way that, with such a crowded marketplace now, you have to grab people so quickly. But it's a really fun and exciting process as well.
I was going to ask you about, marketplace and trends, because, with publishing, I would say you can't really predict a trend. You may just, it's just a pure coincidence that you might get 4 or 5 books come out at the same time on similar themes, and then that trend develops. Are you able to predict trends in TV production?
Well, not necessarily, but you can definitely see some waves. When you look at, we've just done two rom-coms back to back, and The Flat Share really struck a chord with a lot of people, I think, because it had a lot of kind of warmth and integrity to it, and I think people enjoy the wish fulfillment of a rom-com. And it's interesting, Nobody Wants This with Adam Brody and Kristen Bell that dropped on Netflix about a month ago. It's been a phenomenon. They recommissioned it really, really quickly. I think people are craving a bit of optimism and sort of good triumphing over ill in what is a pretty stressful world right now.
It is.
And other trends, I think, that kind of that action space, sort of hijack space is really, a lot of people are looking for that. I mean, I love the more characterful, female skewed end of that market. I'm probably biased, but Killing Eve when it started, or The Flight Incident with which was an HBO Max show, really, really enjoyable. But it's funny when people I wrote a piece recently about, kind of book to film and how that works. And I know what people often think, the thing to get optioned would be a really solid procedural, but actually it's really difficult to distinguish yourself in that space. And every buyer probably has most of the kind of procedurals that they want. Whereas sometimes something a little bit more off kilter can create, can start a trend of its own, perhaps.
Yeah. When you're writing your own books, when you're writing, just writing everything you have, what's your intention when you first start writing a book? Is it just, this is the story I want to tell, these are the characters that, you've developed an attachment with, and you just want to tell that story? Or are you thinking further ahead?
Oh, I definitely think further ahead, Nadine. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. No, I definitely think in terms of the TV a bit, for sure. With this one, I'm really interested in how we portray the workplace on screen. So, industry is such a massive hit, and I've just been in the
industry, yeah,
and I've just been in LA for work in the last couple of weeks as well. And the new series has been it's exploded on HBO. But there aren't actually that many shows that are set in a workplace. The morning show is obviously massive as well, and plays with some of those kind of interpersonal dynamics in really clever ways. And even Slow Horses, in a weird way, is a workplace show.
Yeah.
And that they're all stuck together in that stinky little office, and you're really enjoying all the ways that they irritate each other and wind each other up. So I just felt that doing a thriller with a kind of workplace backdrop gave real potential for TV, and also for kind of being able to build multiple seasons out of that setting.
Can you recognize when, I'm saying this about books publishing, can you recognize when writers are writing with that intention, of not just the book? Can you see it?
I don't know. I suppose when people are very clearly thinking about the concept, maybe. I don't know, though. I think any good book hopefully doesn't feel like a TV treatment, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Feel like it's been just genetically modified to be optioned. But certainly certain concepts lend themselves much more to TV than others.
Yeah. Because I've read a couple of books, and I'm not naming them, in the last year. And I closed the last page and I felt, and it wasn't just me saying it, other people I've spoken to, and they've read the same book, and said, I felt like this was just written for TV. That was the clear intention, that this should just be for a TV movie, series, whatever. It didn't feel like a novel, a whole novel in itself.
It felt a bit mechanical, like it lacked a bit of heart. It's just kind of like an exercise. Yeah. God, I haven't read a book like that for a while, but that would annoy me.
It did, because I feel like you said you're missing the heart of it.
Yeah.
And it's so apparent. You're not saying the story's not good and the characters, but then even sometimes the characters still then felt a bit flat, in a sense.
To be fair, actually, I've just started a thriller, which is a sequel. It's an American book, but it's a sequel. Her previous novel, which I really liked, ended up being a really big TV series. And this one feels a little bit like it's been rushed out, and it's trying to kind of follow the same formula, but it doesn't have the heart of the first one. So I do know what you mean. Yeah.
So what are you working on next? What is Kate Ruby's publishing plans?
I'm having a little bit of a breather, actually, to concentrate on trying to get Everything You Have and Tell Me Your Lies actually to screen. I feel like I need a little bit of time before I start hitting my computer at 6:30 in the morning before the work comes over again.
What is your favourite part? So what's your favourite part of getting Everything You Have to screen? Because it's your book, it's your baby.
Yeah, what I've really enjoyed is that kind of process of we had a writer's room for Tell Me Your Lies, and actually having lots of people feeding into something that you initially created and coming up with ideas and feeling that enthusiasm for the story. I found that it actually quite moving. I felt very grateful and touched by people's kind of care and attention for my book. I'm looking forward to, with Everything You Have, really kind of getting into the weeds and pulling the story apart and working out where to kind of make changes and expand it and all of that kind of thing.
I always ask writers about how they feel about social media and this, this PR side of it. How do you deal with that? Because, you know, you write under a pseudonym, you got your TV, your TV life, you got your writing life, but then, you know, people still need to know about the books.
Yeah. I'm actually quite shy, so I don't love it. I have to admit, I'd rather be just typing in a small dark room, or you know, sort of pushing someone else's story forward. But it's really important, and I started as a PR, so I do work hard at that side of things. I've just done a couple of quite big features for newspapers about various thematics in everything you have, and yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does.
Yes, I do find social media hard. I mean, Twitter just feels, I know it's X now, I just feel like completely narcissistic. So I'm very lazy about it.
Well, everyone who listens to this podcast knows I do not use Twitter anymore. I could, it's changed so much. And I thought, if I'm going to be wasting my time on something, I'd rather do it on something I enjoy. So, Kate, I don't even need to ask you. Yeah, I don't need to ask you my first question, like my last set of questions. For the first one, are you an introvert or extrovert, or a hybrid of the two?
I'm a hybrid, I'd say.
You're definitely a hybrid.
I'm a hybrid.
Is it, I was going to say, is it hard when you're involved in this bubble of whether you're writing your books or producing this TV series? Is it hard then transitioning to the next project? Are you able to move seamlessly into it?
Do you mean like the next book, or I mean, I juggle a lot of different TV projects at once. It's sort of part of the job, but I've been working this morning actually on a really fun legal thriller that we're adapting from a brilliant book. And what I do find is, you know, you do like a 3-hour creative meeting and you're really thinking about each scene and what the intention is and what tweaks will kind of make it clearer or more propulsive. I can't do like 2 of those meetings in a day. Like, you have to kind of really give yourself once, and then after that I need to do slightly more kind of brain dead admin things in the afternoon.
And what about moving on to your own projects? Because, you know, when you finish everything you have, are you like, right, that's it, that's done?
Yeah.
Now on to the next, or?
Well, I haven't got to the next one yet, so obviously I'm not that. I'm not that fleet of foot to be able to start the next one. I think one of the things is that also, you know, when you're I've sort of finished that contract, so when you're in contract and you have to flip straight onto the next book, that can be quite a, you know, you need a breath. It's quite a marathon, then go straight. It sounds like that's what you do. It's a long race to run, isn't it?
It is. And I finished, so it would have been 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Now I delivered my 4th book. And
congrats.
so thank you. So I've had 2 weeks. So for the first week, I was like, I've got nothing to do. And then I had to adapt to not having anything to do. Then the second week I got sick.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It reminds me of, it's very similar to when I was doing trials. And I was like, it takes a completely different energy. It's a mental energy, but then it's a mental energy that manifests into the physical. So when you do stop, your brain stops, like your body then says, right, I need to stop too. I've been on the go.
Yeah.
Right. So what challenge or experience in your life shaped you the most?
Oh, that's a big question. What challenge?
Or experience?
Yeah, I had quite a complex childhood and I went into therapy quite young. And I think a lot of my books are about, like, thematically, are about that arc from not really understanding yourself to understanding yourself. And I've also written about therapy quite extensively. So I wrote 2 books where the therapist, the lead character is a female therapist who gets involved in criminal cases. And then Tell Me All Lies is obviously about a nefarious therapist. Yeah. So I would say probably that journey has influenced my writing quite a bit in terms of content and how I approach it.
And also, do you find like therapy itself, it gives you a different understanding of people and how they work, and then that then translate into your characters?
Yeah, definitely. I think it really feeds into how I think about the psychology of my characters. And how I work with scripts as well.
Mm. So if you could go back to when you were 25 years old and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, spend less money on shoes. Does that count?
Pick out.
Probably that.
It reminds me of the shoe thing. When I was training to be a solicitor, my training contract, I moved from initially I wanted to specialize in media. Then I decided I wanted to specialize in crime. So I moved to a high street law firm, and my salary just dropped. It was so low. Yeah. And I couldn't, basically there was no buying shoes all the time. And the minute I qualified and I moved firms and I got paid, it's like every month I was buying shoes. And I remember my friend calling me one Friday afternoon, because I used to work in Soho, and she called me up and she said, "Where are you?" No, she goes, "Actually, don't even answer. Are you buying shoes?" I was like, "Yes, I'm buying shoes." I was buying shoes before.
Yeah.
I'm just buying shoes. So Kate, what is publishing, and what's your writing journey, your publishing journey, your TV journey, all of it? What has it taught you about yourself?
I think it's taught me to, that you have to roll with the punches, and that you don't always know how things are going to work out, and that you have to, hopefully a really good story makes its way onto the page or onto the screen, and you just have to do the very best you can, and not get too bitter and gnarly when things don't go the way you hoped.
And it's actually, I've got an extra question for you. Do you have different expectations of success? Does success mean something different for the TV stuff in comparison to your own personal writing success, or are they similar?
It's an interesting question. I guess with the novels, they're more personal. That's I bring a lot of myself to those characters. That in any of my novels, the lead characters probably had a lot of me in it. Whereas with TV, you're probably more trying to facilitate other people's creativity. You bring a lot of creativity to it, but it's not kind of like, it hasn't got it's not tattooed on your heart in quite the same way.
Yeah. So, if a show it's not as successful as you'd like it to be, are you able to distance yourself from that?
Oh, that's always gutting when that happens. No, you really,
because you work so long on it and hard on it.
Yeah, and you really want people to resonate with it and for it to be kind of culturally meaningful. So, yeah, no, I wouldn't say that. I think, you always want people to take a show that you've made to their heart.
Yeah. It has streaming. So, of Netflix and Paramount and all those sort of places now where we watch TV, watch shows. Has that changed the way in which the way in which you pitch shows now, or in the way you think about developing a show? Does that change things?
I think it has changed, in the last few years in TV quite a lot, in that you used to maybe start with like a flimsy little 2-page pitch for a show, and you take that into a buyer, and then hopefully they commission a script. Whereas now it's much more common in the UK that you will actually commission a script up top, and then sell it in a more competitive scenario. Ideally, you have more than one person who wants to buy it, but that you take it to a number of buyers at the same time. Whereas previously, you might just have like ITV as your target and take them your piddly little 2 pages and hope that they go on the journey with you from the very beginning.
Does that affect the way in which you write your books? Because, when did you write? No, was it just the same?
No, with the books, really, you're just kind of, at the end of writing a book, you're hoping that it gets optioned, or you're, So in terms of that creative process, probably not so different.
Okay. So finally, Kate Ruby, I just have to ask you, where can listeners of the Conversation podcast, if they can, where can they find you online? Just to say hello.
They can find me on X, although I must admit I'm really, really bad at looking at it. Probably the best place to find me is on Instagram. I'm Kate Ruby Books on Instagram.
Okay. And that just leaves me to say, Kate Ruby, thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@nadinemattheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.